Good evening, friends. My name is Reverend Jasper Peters, and I'm the lead pastor at Belong Church. And in our entire 5 years, we have continued to be interested and have a deep desire to participate in the blessing that is education, both in equipping the people inside our community and beyond our walls to access education. And that has led us to asking a question again and again in different ways. And the way that that question has come up in this moment has been: who is missing? Who is left out? Who's unserved by the way that education happens or does not happen for us right now? And so we decided to try to make this internal conversation a little bit more permeable, a little more accessible, and present it to you in this way. And so our hope is that you will listen thoughtfully, and hopefully you can learn something, you can see and understand perspectives that you might not have had before. And we would love to have your questions a little bit later in the session. So feel free, wherever you're watching, you can chat in and ask a question, and we would love to engage with those a little later. At this point, I'm going to introduce our host. John Hawthorne is a retired Christian educator. He spent time teaching sociology and academic administration at Olivet Nazarene University, Sterling College, Warner Pacific College, Point Loma Nazarene University, and Spring Arbor University in Michigan. He has been a part of the Belong community and a blessing to us with his service, but also his thoughtfulness and his thoughtful consideration. So I will hand it over to John to bring on our panelists. Oh, you're on mute right now. Sorry, John.
Okay. I was being good and muted when you told me to, and then I forgot. So just a conversation about kind of personal experience of education. I won't draw on my own very much. I'm particularly interested in kind of the dynamics of public school, which have been in the news in a lot of different ways recently. Particularly over the last couple of years, the level of disruption has been immense. So what I'd like to do is begin by asking our panelists to introduce themselves and their current teaching role or their most recent teaching role, how long they were in it, kind of where their focus has been, and kind of, well, we'll start there. Okay, so I don't know if I could just call on people. Holly, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Holly Alger. This is my 11th year in Denver Public Schools. I've served in multiple different schools, both middle school and high school math roles. I currently serve down the street from Belong at Whittier ECE 8 as the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math teacher.
Alexia?
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexia. I taught first grade and fourth grade in Texas and in Colorado. I taught for 6 years total, first grade for 5 years and fourth for 1 year. And I was a self-contained teacher. So that means that I taught all of the core subjects in elementary school.
Okay, and Emily.
Yeah, hi, I'm Emily. I'm actually a teacher in the university system rather than in the school system. I'm an assistant professor at CU Denver in the math department. I've been there since 2019, but I've been kind of teaching throughout graduate school as well. So that was since kind of 2012, I guess.
Good.
Yeah.
So say something about, Alexia, we'll have you start and say something about what was your most recent school, that fourth grade class? What was it like? What was the building like? What kind of students were there? How big was your class? Just give us a sense of kind of what that looked like.
Absolutely. So I taught in a suburb out in north of Denver, Colorado, and I taught at a brand new campus. And so 2018 was the first year that we were open. That campus is also in pre-K through 8th grade campus. So we had pre-K, your typical elementary school K-5, as well as 6th through 8th graders. And we had pretty large class sizes here in Colorado, which is something I learned very quickly after relocating here from Texas. In first grade in Texas, we had a cap of 21 or 22 students, a 22-to-1 student-teacher ratio. And in Colorado, there is not a threshold. So my first year, I had 28 students, and then I think I had 26 or 27 in fourth grade, upwards of 30. Because we're a new campus, we were very, very resourced. So it was the first time that I had the privilege of having almost all of my resources provided for both me instructionally and physically to set up the environment in the classroom, as well as supplies for students. So when it came to material needs or instructional needs, I felt and was very supported monetarily by the campus and the district, in both classroom supplies and furniture, and in instructional resources. I really do believe the district that I was in did a really good job of training teachers on expectations for different subjects, as well as just providing a lot of good resources, from lesson plans to professional development books to professional development to coaching. I'm really thankful for the last placement that I had for that experience.
Very good. Holly, you have a little bit longer to reflect on. So you don't have to go through the whole realm of things, but at least looking at Whittier, how would you describe the school, the setting, the resourcing, all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is my third school in Denver Public Schools. Yeah, Whittier has been around for a really long time. It's got a really rich history of serving the community. Our principal was a teacher there since 1990. Grew up in the community. There's a lot of family ties, a lot of kids whose parents went to Whittier, staff members who went to Whittier and now work at Whittier. It's just a really, really beautiful community to join. Sometimes I'm asked, like, do you teach at a public school? Because Whittier does a really incredible job with the resources. Our class sizes are amazing. I teach less than 20 kids in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And I know, Alexia, hearing you talk about first grade being so big, like that's even more important to have those small class sizes in elementary. And that also happens at Whittier as well. So we're a really small place. We only have one class per grade level. So there's only one cohort of first graders, one cohort of second graders. So we have 10 classes, but each class is a different grade level. I guess there's a couple ECE classes, but yeah.
But that also means that by fourth grade, a bunch of them have progressed together.
They've been together. So my new 6th grade class, so many of them have already established relationships. They know each other. There's siblings down the hallway. It just creates a really beautiful kind of family feel and culture. So I feel very, very grateful to be at Whittier.
So Emily, I know that talking about college teaching in contrast to that is very different because they come and go and you don't have the same, that was bad. I was going to say you don't have the same emotional attachment, but it's a different kind of experience when you're dealing with 20-year-olds than when you're dealing with 10-year-olds in terms of kind of what that bonding feels like. I wanted to change direction a little bit. If it's then kind of, this is not on the question list that you were given, but I happen to know that this may surprise people. Emily is not a native Coloradan. Tell me about your what was your equivalent of elementary school experience like? Does it sound like what they're describing, or in what ways is it different?
Yeah, well, it was a few years ago that I was actually in elementary school, as you can probably tell. But yes, I do have friends who have worked in an elementary school, and I did go there myself once. And I think there are things that are similar and things that are different. I think a lot of pressures are the same. I went to an elementary school that was in a pretty small town. It was, as you were talking about, Holly, my mum actually went to the same school when she was in elementary. So there was definitely that community feeling. In terms of resources, I think it wasn't maybe the best resourced, but I do think there were resources that kind of the teachers themselves maybe didn't have to provide as much as I think I see here.
Okay. Is there anything you want to say about the University of Colorado that just sort of that links to resourcing is different? You don't deal with that, and they're so transient.
Yeah, so resourcing is very different. Our resources, are good. I show up in the classroom I've been assigned, and there's appropriate technical equipment for me to plug my stuff into, and off I go. I think although it can be transient, I do think maybe because the math department isn't that large, even with kind of our undergraduate students, like you are able to kind of form relationships with them. Some more than others, but especially those who have kind of plans to kind of stay on, will need kind of references and that kind of thing. Also, what can happen quite a lot is I'll have a student who takes a class with me, and then we'll maybe want to do some kind of independent study afterwards. And then, of course, graduate students, the relationship is very different, especially those that you are doing research with. Those students you get to know very well. So it's different, but there are definitely those mentoring relationships too, I would say.
Good. Tell us, and I'll let whoever wants to go first just jump in. What's the part of your day that is energizing? The part of your day that as a teacher that it's that sense that said I could do this forever. I mean, I had a running joke when I was teaching college that said that I taught for free and they paid me a lot of money to go to meetings and grade papers. And so what's your moment? When is it when you say, this is what I was born to do? This is peak me in the classroom.
Yeah, I think it's those moments that you are instructing that kids are getting excited. Like I'm thinking about on Tuesday, my sixth graders had this cool lesson about area. And it wasn't like a lot of them just wanted to be like, I know the area is length times width, which is awesome. Like they were making connections to what they had learned already, but we really dug deeper. We looked at pictures that had different colors, and some of the colors made bigger shapes, and kids were really starting to connect and get excited about the idea of area. It was a task that was really open-ended, so kids could take it different ways and get excited about it. So I think it's just those moments that that the kids are connecting to the content that you're working with. You're seeing progress, you're asking the right questions, and just really like seeing that learning happen, seeing that excitement, and yeah.
Good. Who's next?
I can share next. I was not emotionally prepared for this question because I can feel the tears coming. I had 2 hours of my day or times, and the first one is workshop in the elementary classroom. We did a lot of workshops, so we moved back and forth between a short upfront lesson with a teaching point, and then kids would break out into groups or to work independently to practice a new skill or continue working on a previous skill, and then we'd come together. And during that time, I was able to meet with kids one-on-one as a teacher to go deeper on the instructional point or support them with where they are with whatever the topic or the skill was for that day or that month. And that I remember many times, both in first and fourth grade, when we were really in the second semester with first graders, because that's like it's like we're working all year for this beautiful moment in March and April and May. Just the hum of the classroom, where like there's this low level, like active chatter, and you can walk around and hear the conversations the kids are having about the books they're reading or, their game they're playing to help them add numbers. And then seeing them independently be able to transition onto the next thing and do it so well. And then me get to meet with the kids one-on-one, knowing that they're still engaged, knowing that the rest of the class is still engaged. Like that was such a sweet spot for me. And there are times where I'd be like, it was all worth it. This is it. Like, this is the moment. So those workshop times for all the subjects, reading, writing, and math, really brought me a lot of joy. The second moment or hour was our social emotional learning times and our morning meetings. Morning meetings were just game changers as far as helping to establish and build community in the classroom. And with my fourth graders, we got to a point where they completely took over our morning meeting. So the first, 30 minutes of the day was completely student led, and they would get up there and tell jokes and tell the weather of the day and like hone in an important quote that we were reading, and just seeing the kids step into things that they love to do was also like, all right, this is it.
Cool.
So those are mine.
Emily?
Yeah, as I was kind of listening to the two of you, what really occurred to me is whether you're teaching first graders or like adults, like how similar the moments that bring you joy are, right? Like the two things that popped into my head right away were being in the classroom and being able to kind of share, some ways like math is kind of actually used, and seeing students kind of finally put together for the first time, like, well, this stuff that I have to learn like really does connect to the real world and things like that. And then the other thing that I always love is when I get to work with the research students that I'm mentoring, and it's one-on-one or it's just a few of us in my office, and we're kind of talking about the project. And those are like without fail, like the best time of my day. I come home and I say to Ben, maybe I shouldn't say this because it's being streamed, but like faculty meetings suck, but my student meetings are always fun. Always. So yeah, just it's seeing students excited, it's seeing them grow in confidence and finally realizing like they can do something, whether that's kind of a first grader or whether that's someone who's just realizing that, oh, maybe I can do this, maybe I can make it to grad school.
Very good. Obviously, we have to deal with the flip side of that question. What's the part of your day, and I'm going to set meetings aside because we all get that, right? Not considering meetings that you're required to go to for your own good, or the business of the school. What's the part of the day that most feels like work? That it is, rather than being energizing, it's, I don't want to say sucking the life out of you, but it is draining. Does that make, I give you can identify with those. I don't know if we're going to get happy emojis out of that or not, but Anyway, Emily, why don't you go ahead and
Yeah. So it was some of the you said that I couldn't answer meetings, and that like took me a minute because that honestly was going to be my first answer. I think some of the things that really drain me, I think about my email inbox, and it can sometimes feel like this kind of just constant flow of things coming in, and it can really feel like sometimes that'll happen at like 5 a.m. Sometimes it'll happen at like 1 a.m. And these things can kind of feel like things that people need from me, whether it's students or faculty, or a lot of times it's not students or faculty, it's just kind of random things that are happening in the university. And sometimes it can feel like it can never stop, and that you shouldn't turn it off, right? Because you always need to be doing what you need to do. And I think for me that can be hard. Yeah, that can be the hardest part.
No, that's good.
I can share next.
Okay.
For me, the biggest or most painful moments were, I think, in my earlier years, and similarly in my earlier years. I only taught for 6 years. But I remember what it was like to be such a baby and inexperienced teacher.
You feel so different from year 6. I get that.
Thank you, Holly. It's like that, the feeling of like, okay, I'm trying really hard not to ramble. When there are so many fires, little fires going on, and as one person, you literally do not have the capacity emotionally, mentally, professionally to be able to respond to all of them in a manner that like treats everyone with the most dignity, or even towards yourself. Like those were the most like painful, and then so defeating after, because then it's like, like one kid, really needs your attention for something hard that they're experiencing emotionally. And then another kid needs a pass to go to the nurse. And then another kid is trying to leave early for the day. And then another child has a question about instruction. And then another child is like, then you can hear their voice raised because they're upset. And then there's the kids who are just chilling and they just need a little pep talk, but you can't get to them because you're writing the pass. And then you need like, those moments were the biggest, just the most difficult for me, and so draining in the sense of like, I genuinely can't do it. And I feel like I can do this better. And I think was a challenge for me, that I realized I could always develop my professional skills to meet those types of challenges in a better way. And they were still going to be there. While my capacity grew, I was still going to be missing the target just because of the way that classrooms are set up in general. So those were really defeating moments every year, no matter how.
No, that's, I certainly empathize with that. My equivalent in lecture classes is, it's the good solid B+ student that never gets your attention, because the struggling student demands your attention and you want to give your attention to the top student. And so it's that middle bunch that's polite and does the work, and that you really wish you could have spent more time with. So we'll all get emotional. Holly?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like remarkable that all of us at different levels and different subjects like come to the same conclusion. I was just thinking overwhelming needs, just of not being able to provide my kids what they need, whether it's time or resources or whatever it is. And Emily, I think then adding on the additional load of like my students need all these things like Alexia is talking about. And then also, you know, lesson plans or grading or all those other just, you know, sort of more administrative tasks being loaded on top of that can be so overwhelming.
So in that regard, do you feel that the school that you're part of provides appropriate supports for the social, emotional, and mental wellness of the children? Or what more could they do would be another way to think about it. Anybody have a thought?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can go, like, talking from a, you know, a university perspective. We have much more kind of resources in the sense of, you know, a counseling center. We have the Phoenix Center, which is specifically for people who've experienced kind of sexual assault and things like that. And we're really grateful to have those things on campus and those things to be able to point students to. I think sometimes there can still be a little bit of a gap between kind of these things exist and it's great that they do, but and some students do utilize them and that's great, but there are a lot of students that maybe could use that help, but for some reason, because they don't end up with the connection or the encouragement or maybe even the knowledge that those things are there, they go underused and they don't use that. And I'm not sure I have any great ideas to make it better, but I think that's a gap. I think there needs to be a way to make our students feel safe to use the resources that we are lucky to have in a way that, you know, a high school or a middle school or an elementary school.
But even high school and, you know, for high school and college and probably even for the 6th to 8th grades, peer pressure rises to such a level at this point that, you know, even if resources are available, taking advantage of the resources puts you at risk in some ways of in the eyes of the other children and heaven forbid the staff, but it happens. I don't know, I kind of walked into 6th to 8th. Holly, what do you?
Yeah, I think our school does an amazing job. And I think kind of like we were talking about, it feels like the needs are overwhelming. I think COVID affected all of us and there's just a lot of needs there. So I think our school has done an amazing job of staffing with a psychologist and the social workers and mental health providers who do a really, really phenomenal job. I think one thing that we need more of, I'm really excited. There's a new program called Heart in Hand this year. That's an after school program from like 3 to 6. And I feel like really fills an important gap of loving those kids. There's going to be different programs happening. I'm just really excited for this school year. This is kind of the first year that we've really had a ton of wraparound after school services. Our kids are getting connected with sports. So even though that doesn't feel directly like counseling, I just think it's so important that our kids have adults in their lives that they're connected to. And so I feel so grateful and also just like welcome more involvement as well. Swanson Rink is a tech company in Denver that's reached out to us and they're looking at what programming they can offer and whether they can start a Lego League program, like a robotics program for our kids as well. So I just think more community involvement. You know, I think the district is limited with resources. We've got what we have and we're going to do the best that we can with it. But just having more people step in and say, hey, I'm good at this, or hey, I can teach this is really, really important for our kids.
Okay, so in light of what you described, are there places where a church community could connect in some fashion to help deal with the needs, whether that's the after school kind of thing you're describing, that's, being, some schools have, church buddies where, you link up with people at a college and families outside the college, or there was a third example that came out of what Alexa said that I lost. Helping deal with the diversity of student needs. I mean, it's beyond having student aides. Are there ways that people who care about education from the local church, for example, could step in and do something to help those needs? We do a good job. We try to do a good job, and are thankfully at Belong doing a good job of trying to address the material needs in terms of the uniforms and the backpacks, the school supplies, and all of that. But what about these other kind of lingering, kind of emotional, are there emotional support issues? Are there ways that you could imagine good church people who want to have an impact in the lives of students and I'd add teachers could make a difference in terms of helping to impact that? That was a long, rambly question. I apologize. Pick any part of that made sense to you.
I'll go first or share. And then John, just a reminder, if you haven't seen it yet, the chat, because there are some good questions coming from our audience members. First, when I was teaching in Texas, there was a group of retired folks who would come in every other week to read. And while I know that their demographic was retirement and not necessarily church members, I think that is something that I saw like a direct outside of school impact on my kids, because we paired them up with the same reading buddy. So they look forward to seeing their buddy come and read with them. So it was another adult consistent relationship that the kids look forward to. And then they were also one-on-one. So, which is helpful because as a teacher, you just can't give one-on-one like that to all of the classroom. And so that is something I think maybe in some way, creative way, churches can help, is maybe gathering a community to volunteer once a month or on some type of consistent basis throughout the school year where they get to establish a relationship with a teacher or a particular classroom. And then I think the other way that I always was curious about, even when I was in the classroom, is advocacy. Like something that is really different now, I think, in some places in schooling from when I was a kid, is the focus on social emotional development, and not only teaching kids subjects, but also realizing that they're whole human beings and persons first before they're a student. And they have whole lives before showing up in the classroom. And the way that we welcome them in and treat them in the school setting incorporates all of that and matters. And when it regard to advocacy, I think church members can establish relationships with schools, one, by volunteering. That way everyone becomes familiar faces. And then two, starting to ask, like, what are your school's core values? I would really love to know so that I can volunteer in a way that, assimilates into the core values in a positive way. That helps starts a discussion of like, oh, the community cares about this. What are our core values? What do we believe about kids? How are we going to respond when, there are behavior challenges? What is our behavior support system? And all of those comes out of our core beliefs. So I think asking those questions, how do your teachers have a social emotional curriculum that they're following? What is it? What are the core pillars of that social emotional curriculum? If my kid has a meltdown, how are they going to be responded to? Like those types of things, I think, help, like iron sharpen iron kind of thing, help educate community and the staff for what is important.
Good. Anybody want to add?
So I can just say something quickly. I think this is something that is, of course, going to vary quite a lot between children and then kind of adults. One thing I can kind of say though is I think sometimes it's easy to forget that like some of our students, they're all adults, right? But some of them might be kind of 19 years old and maybe the first time they're living away from home and kind of not in the same city. And like even graduate students, they're a little older, but it's very likely that they've moved away from their comfort zone and they've moved away from the support system. And I think while maybe there's not a direct way to kind of go into the university and contact them, I think churches in the community can really do a great job of providing kind of support for people who have just moved away from their support system. For if a student turns up to church, inviting them to lunch with your family, because sometimes it's just nice to hang out with a family when you haven't seen yours for a while. So just kind of things like that, maybe that is different to, of course, how you would support a younger child.
Holly, anything to add?
Yeah, just that like all skills and interests I think are welcome. Like I'm so grateful that there's this new community of people that want to teach my kids coding, because I've had kids begging for years to learn coding and I don't know how to code. And I had a kiddo a few years ago who like truly was like my IT department. He was like amazing at technology. Anytime something went wrong with my board or anything, he would just like jump in and try to figure it out. And so I was trying to connect him with professionals in that field too. And kind of that fell through, but really like whatever your field is, whatever you're interested in, like I bet there's a kiddo that would love to shadow you. I bet there was someone that could learn from your expertise, even if you're like, I'm an IT guy, what could I do to help? I'm like, no, I promise I have a 7th grader super stoked about IT. So really just feel free to reach out and get connected, because we need everyone.
I'm a sociologist, so forgive me for this. Given what we read in the news lately, even teaching socio-emotional learning is getting attacked, which is horrible. I'm editorializing, but I don't think you'll disagree with me, is horrible. How do we help you as teachers when you're having to deal with parent concerns that might not always be, trying to do this gently, the most reasonable and rational? Because that's one of those additional painful stressors that we talked about a minute ago, just in terms of what's going on in education, at least if in the news in the last 2 years. That may just be a speech if nobody wants to say anything.
I loved our social, now I'm totally blanking on her role, but we had a full-time social emotional learning specialist on our campus with a psychology background. And then we also had counselors for middle school and elementary school, and pulling them in to receive coaching for how to navigate those situations with parents was always my go-to. I always learned something new, even if that was just learning how to phrase things or how to respond or how to use my language in a way that helps calm the conversation. What I found oftentimes is even in a little bit, unreasonable concerns, is that it was reasonable to parents in the sense of like, they also just want to be heard. Like they also, like we have the same goal of making sure that your kid is safe and sound and learning and developing skills that's going to help them navigate the school and navigate their social experiences and navigate their own emotional regulation. And so our goal is the same. So that's something that I would always try to come back to.
Good. Emily, Holly, anything to, you don't have to. You just led me into another question. I'm trying not to get too far from the questions that were shared with you, but this is the way my brain works. So it just sort of runs with the moment. Same question about how church people, assuming that people are open to church people helping, which I guess is a question that one has to build trust for that to happen. How could we support the parents? I'm going to focus this, I think, mostly on Holly's situation because you're our neighborhood school. Holly, do you have any thoughts about how we as church people could help provide support to parents as they're navigating all of the disruptions that we've seen in education and their own anxieties and concerns about how the children are doing, and so that you're not carrying all that yourself, you and the principal? But that's, any thoughts on parents, on how we could help support parents?
Yeah, that's a really tricky question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is our parents, like us, are exhausted. COVID's been exhausting. They work really hard. This is not just specific to Whittier, but a lot of the schools that I worked at in Denver Public Schools, there's a high percentage of free and reduced lunch. So a high percentage of our families who are struggling financially. And so I think I came into education and I used to say, like, I want to be an educator because I want to be a part of ending racial inequality. So that was like a really important value for me. And now in year 11, I'm just seeing the ways that the like systemic racism in our society is affecting our parents and affecting our families and affecting their ability. Just affecting everyone. And so I just think about, like, I don't know, I need America to pass a, minimum income. I need higher minimum wage. There are so many things that our families need that like just our societal fixes. And I know that's maybe not what you're asking, is like, what can the church do?
No, that's exactly what I'm asking.
I think that's like really interesting, of like, our kids would do better if our parents had margin. If our parents didn't have to work 2 jobs and like, be out until 10 p.m., they could, look over their kids' homework. But like, the system is not allowing that, and the system is racist, and so it's specifically affecting our Black and brown families more significantly, and so that's really difficult. And so then I think practically, education can do the best that we can. So a couple things that I'm thinking of is, like, a lot of schools have parents that have more margin. Like, our school doesn't have a PTA. Like, we don't have any parents that have that margin to be involved. And so if you guys could kind of adopt us, or, kind of become our PTA and kind of try to fill those gaps and try to figure out what families need, and then execute that, in a way that just some of them don't have time for. And I'm not speaking for everyone, but just in general, we just love people to come around Whittier and ask what we need and try to fill in some of those gaps.
Cool. No, that's very good. So I have a question that came up here about, then this has to do with the math connection between the three of you. Holly, your students got excited about different ways of approaching area. There's a certain amount of anxiety that parents carry from their own. My wife was a math teacher as well. And I think that people get stuck at whatever level it was. They said, I can't do this. I don't know anymore. And how do we, is there a way to help, maybe it's even help the children help their parents understand that they can in fact make sense of this, and it's not all magic. It says some of what Emily does is magic, so that's
I don't know if your question was directed at Holly, and I'm not sure
it's any of you.
The parent part, but the phrase I saw was math anxiety in adults, and like, from my experience, that is a very, very real thing, and it's a real thing kind of in my classroom sometimes, and in my experience, it is something that is women and minorities suffer from at a much higher degree. And so I think there's two parts to, well, there's way more than two parts, but there's two parts to it. Then kind of the way I kind of see it is there's just this sense in math that you have to be a certain way to belong. You know, that you have to either kind of naturally be good at it, or you're never going to be able to do it. And being naturally good at it means you probably look a certain way. And, you know, that isn't kind of a stereotype that any of us can kind of bust overnight. But for me, I find it so important. I try and kind of say it at the beginning of, especially my lower level classes, kind of like, this is something you can learn. Like it might not be easy, but this is something you can learn. And you know what? Like not getting it the first time is completely normal. Like this is something you learn by practicing, and it's hard and you just have to practice. And you know what? If you don't understand it the way I explained it the first time, we'll explain it in a different way, and then we'll explain it in a different way. And it's not about this kind of innate ability. It's about just kind of learning something. And some of like the most, I had one student in Calculus 1, and she had to take it for her major that was not math. And she was terrified. And she came to my office hours every single week, and it was over COVID, so it was via Zoom. And we just worked through it, and she got it, and she got an A in my class. And then the next semester she took Calc 2 with me, even though she didn't have to have it for her major. It was recommended. And she said, like, you know, I never thought I'd be taking this kind of thing. And I don't think about, you know, necessarily even being a good teacher or not a good teacher. It's just demonstrating that somebody can do this even if they feel like they don't belong to the stereotype. And I think that's
good.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that research and just like language around that has been coming out. Joe Bowler out of Stanford has been doing a lot of work around the idea that there are no natural math people, that being quick doesn't mean that you're better at math. It's really, like you're saying, bashing a lot of those, or just kind of ending a lot of those stereotypes that we've had about what it means to be a good math student. Like math is about building those connections. Like I said, that, you know, that the area problem wasn't about like just quickly landing on the right answer, but really exploring and understanding and seeing the beauty of math in that way. So I'm really grateful that there's like a big movement in education right now about growth mindset and about how all of our brains are muscles that are meant to grow. And I think kids, like you said, are better than adults at really kind of internalizing that. And so it's been sweet to see that. I don't have the answer yet of how to get the kids to teach the parents. But I think just the more that we speak to them in that way, the more that they'll speak to themselves in that way about their math abilities as well.
You both just made me remember that going to my son's 8th grade Meet the Teacher night, my 36-year-old son, and now 36-year-old son. And his teacher met us and he said, "Oh, you teach college? I've always wanted to teach college. That'd be interesting. I taught high school for a while." And then he says, "But I decided to go back to before they decided they couldn't do math," which I always thought was the most remarkable sentiment. And it kind of, I think, generalizes across topics of, you know, when is it that students say, "Oh, I'm just not good at school," and how do we get in front of that so that we keep those attitudes? And it goes back to the family context and the economic context and the racial all of that comes together. But the worst thing that happens is that by 4th grade, I think the data is that reading separation becomes stable, and that reading gap never goes away. And so how we kind of get back on the front end of that and be able to really make a difference. Okay, I'm supposed to wrap up here soon. So last question is, in spite of all we've talked about and everything swirling around education in the media and everything else. What gives you hope for it about the classroom, about teaching, about education?
Sorry. It was like right at the same time. I mean, the answer that just comes to my mind first is like my students. Like they just seeing kind of how passionate they are about learning, but also about going into academia and changing it for the better. It gives me so much hope. Like a lot of my graduate students, like we don't provide them healthcare. Like we barely can pay them anything. A lot of them don't have health insurance. Like they're not trying to get this degree to because they're making a lot of money or anything like that. They're doing it because they love what they do and they want to be able to eventually show other people how to do what they love. And that just kind of seeing that and seeing like the good in them kind of really gives me hope more than anything else, I think.
Good.
I learned this from an educator of educator online. Her name is Britt Hawthorne. And it's a phrase that has stuck with me and for me did and does give me hope, especially when we break down all the barriers for what prevents kids from showing up fully. So from, mom and dad or grandma and grandpa not getting home until 10 because they have to work multiple jobs and they don't have the margin to read with them at home or follow up on homework or talk to them about their day, to, kids seeing, so I'm sorry, I can feel myself rambling, so I'm bringing myself back.
No, you're good.
When we think about these different things, and then we think about the racial barriers that really are deeply embedded into how we show up in the world, in and out of the classroom. Many of these things are learned behaviors, right? Like we learn that we just are not good at math. We learn that, science is for them or for that kid and not for me. We learn that the kid who has a different skin color than me is not worthy to be my friend. We learn that I have to sit with this group of kids at lunch because then I'm going to get ostracized, even though they ostracized me in this group. This is like all of these things are learned behaviors. And if they are learned behaviors, that means we can unlearn them and we can learn better, more gracious and dignified ways of being in the world. So that is what gives me hope. Like these things of how we show up now, we learned them, which means we can learn again. That's
Good. Holly?
Yeah, I think it's like, despite the frustration of thinking about how our system of racism, our economic systems are broken, and really our education systems are not fully functioning the way that they need to either, is just knowing that, you're showing up to a system that isn't perfect, but like you're showing up to the kids. So kind of like you both said, is just your students and knowing that you get to get excited about something with them and be a part of their story and be a part of their adventure is what keeps me going.
Thank you. This has been really great. I have, there's so much more I could dig into, and but we wanted to limit this to an hour and not people listen to me ramble for the evening. But lots of ideas have come forth, and some I'm going to have to think more about. I tend to jump too quickly into program. If I take information and want to create things to do right away, and I'm trying to fight that temptation, but there's a lot of raw material here that we've talked about, that not just for Belong, but for anybody who wants to say, as a retired educator, I don't live near Whittier, but I could figure things out and figure out what to do and what role to play occasionally. So this has been good. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your sharing and your passion. for the work and for the children. And hopefully we'll do this again sometime. So thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank y'all.
Thanks.